Something has been hidden in the most ordinary place in your life, a place you trust, a place you never question. But what if I told you the battlefield is closer than you think? What if the danger was never outside, but within your daily routine? Why do some people feel drained, attacked, unsettled, for no reason? Tonight you are about to uncover a secret most people were never meant to hear. You have been trained to ignore the small moments, the quiet places, the routines you repeat without thinking. And that is exactly where the attack begins. Not in chaos, not in noise, but in stillness. In the one place where your guard is completely down. You walk in unaware, you sit disconnected, your mind drifts. And in that moment, you are spiritually open in ways you don't understand. This is not about fear, this is about awareness. Because what you do not discern, you cannot defend against. There are environments where your energy drops suddenly. You've felt it. The unexplained heaviness, that sudden wave of fatigue, that strange mental fog that wasn't there before. And you brushed it off. But what if it wasn't random? What if it was strategic? You see, attacks don't always come through dramatic events. They come through access points. Moments where your focus is broken. Moments where your body is still, but your mind is unguarded. And one of the most overlooked moments is when you are alone in confined spaces, cut off from awareness. You scroll your phone. You overthink. You sit longer than you should. And slowly, your mental state begins to shift. Negative thoughts begin to whisper. Doubt creeps in. Fear tries to take root, and you assume it's just stress. But patterns don't lie. Have you ever noticed how certain thoughts repeat themselves in those moments? The same fears, the same insecurities, the same emotional weight. That's not random, that's a cycle. And cycles are designed. Because the goal is not to destroy you instantly. The goal is to weaken you gradually, to plant seeds in moments when you are least alert, to introduce thoughts that don't belong to you and make you believe they do. That is how influence works. Quiet, subtle, persistent. You begin to carry emotions you can't explain. You leave feeling heavier than when you entered, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And the most dangerous part, you normalize it. You say it's nothing. You say I'm just tired. You say everyone feels like this. Number. Not everyone feels that way. And not every feeling is yours. Some are introduced, some are amplified, some are repeated until they become your internal voice. And once that happens, the battle has already shifted, because now the attack doesn't need an external source. It lives inside your thoughts. That is how strongholds begin. Not with fear, but with agreement. Agreement with thoughts that weaken you. Agreement with feelings that drain you. Agreement with narratives that limit you. And all it takes is repeated exposure in moments of vulnerability. That is why awareness matters. Because once you see the pattern, you break the cycle. You start to question what you feel. You start to challenge what you think. You stop accepting everything as truth. And suddenly, the influence loses power. You see, the real danger was never the place. It was your unconscious state within it. The lack of presence, the lack of control, the lack of intentional thought. Because where your mind goes, your state follows. And where your state weakens, influence increases. But here is where everything shifts. You are not powerless. You were never meant to be passive in your own mind. You were meant to be aware, disciplined, intentional. You were meant to guard your thoughts, to recognize patterns, to reject what does not align with strength, clarity, and peace. And the moment you do that, everything changes. The same place that once drained you loses its hold. The same moment that once weakened you becomes controlled. Because now you are present. Now you are aware. Now you are not easily influenced. And awareness is the first step to breaking every hidden attack. The second layer is deeper, more calculated, more intentional. Because once your mind becomes a target, the next objective is your environment. You think you are alone, but you are surrounded by patterns, habits, energy you've created without realizing it. And repetition is where influence gains strength. You return to the same place, at the same time, with the same mindset, day after day. And slowly, that space becomes conditioned, not physically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. You've noticed it before. Certain places feel heavier than others. Certain moments carry a strange discomfort, not enough to alarm you, but enough to disturb your peace. And you ignore it, because it doesn't make sense. But influence doesn't need to make sense. It only needs consistency, because consistency builds familiarity. And familiarity lowers your defenses. Now listen carefully. When a space becomes associated with distraction, negative thinking, or emotional release, it becomes a pattern loop. You don't enter neutral. You enter already influenced, already primed, already leaning toward the same thoughts you had the last time. That's how cycles trap you, not by force, but by repetition. And over time, your mind begins to expect it. You sit down and your thoughts immediately shift. You don't even question it anymore. It feels automatic. Like something just comes over you. But it's not random. It's programmed behavior, conditioned response. Your brain has linked that space with a certain mental state. And now it triggers it on command. That's where the real danger lies. Because now the attack doesn't need to fight you. You've already built the pathway for it. You've already reinforced the loop. And every time you repeat it, you strengthen it. That's why some people feel stuck in cycles they can't explain. They keep returning to the same mental place, the same emotional weight, the same internal struggle. And they don't realize it's tied to repeated environments and unchecked thoughts. You might walk in feeling normal, but you walk out feeling drained, confused, heavy, and you can't pinpoint why. So you ignore it again, and the cycle continues. But here's the truth most people never confront. Not every environment deserves your mental openness. Not every moment should be spent disconnected. Not every space should be allowed to shape your inner state. Because your mind is not meant to be left unguarded. It is meant to be directed, focused, protected. You cannot afford to let repetition control your thinking. You cannot afford to let environments dictate your emotional state. Because the more you allow it, the deeper the conditioning becomes. And eventually, it feels like part of you. That's how strong patterns hide. They blend into your identity. You start saying things like, this is just how I am, this is just how I feel, this is normal for me. Number, it was learned, repeated, reinforced. And anything that was learned can be unlearned, but it requires interruption. It requires awareness in the exact moment the pattern tries to activate. The moment you enter that space, the moment your thoughts begin to shift, the moment the familiar heaviness tries to return, that's where you take control. Not later, not after, but in the moment. You slow down. You become conscious. You observe your thoughts instead of becoming them. And suddenly, the automatic response is no longer automatic. The loop begins to break. You replace passive thinking with intentional focus. You stop feeding the same mental pathways. And without repetition, they weaken. That is how you reclaim your mind, not by avoiding life, but by refusing to be controlled within it. Because the real battle was never about the place itself, it was about the pattern attached to it. Break the pattern and the influence collapses. Ignore the pattern and it strengthens. The choice is happening every single day, in moments you once overlooked, in places you once ignored, in habits you once dismissed. But now you see, now you recognize the cycle, and recognition is the beginning of freedom. Now, the third layer is where most people lose the battle without even realizing a battle has begun. Because this is no longer just about thoughts, this is about agreement. What you allow to stay eventually begins to speak for you. And what speaks for you starts shaping your reality. You enter a quiet moment, your mind drifts, and suddenly a thought appears. Subtle, sharp, uninvited. You're falling behind, you're not strong enough, that something isn't right with you. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And that's why it's dangerous. Because whispers don't trigger resistance. They feel like your own voice. So you don't fight it. You entertain it. You analyze it. Sit with it longer than you should. And in that moment, something shifts. You move from observer to participant. That is the doorway. Agreement. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet nod inside your mind. Maybe it's true. And the moment you say that, the seed is planted. Because thoughts alone don't control you. But thoughts you agree with begin to root. They begin to repeat. They begin to grow. Until one day, they no longer feel like thoughts. They feel like facts. You start adjusting your behavior around them. Limiting yourself, holding back, questioning your worth. And all of it began with a single moment of agreement. That's how internal strongholds are formed. Not through force, but through repetition and acceptance. And the most dangerous part? You defend them. You justify them. You protect the very thoughts that are weakening you. Because now they feel personal. They feel like truth. But truth doesn't drain you. Truth doesn't confuse you. Truth doesn't keep you stuck in cycles of doubt and fear. So if a thought produces weakness, it deserves to be questioned, not accepted. But most people never question it. They let it play over and over again. especially in moments of isolation, moments when no one else is around, moments where their guard is down. That's when the loop tightens. That's when the voice gets louder, not because it gained power, but because it gained permission. You allowed it to stay. You allowed it to speak. You allowed it to repeat. And repetition creates belief. But here is where everything changes. You are not required to agree with every thought you hear. You are not obligated to accept every feeling that shows up. You have authority over your internal world, but authority only works when it is exercised. The moment a thought appears, you can challenge it. The moment a feeling rises, you can question it. The moment doubt whispers, you can shut it down. But it requires awareness in real time, not after the damage is done. In the exact moment it tries to enter, you stop, you recognize, you refuse agreement, you say, "This is not mine." And you mean it, not casually, not passively, but with conviction, because rejection breaks the cycle. No agreement, no root, no growth, no control. That is how you dismantle internal attacks. You cut them off at the source, before they become patterns, before they become beliefs, before they become identity. It feels permanent. Becomes identity, it feels permanent, but it was never permanent. It was repeated, and anything repeated can be stopped. But you must become alert. You must become disciplined in your thinking. You must become intentional with what you allow to stay in your mind. Because your mind is not a storage unit for every passing thought. It is a controlled space. And you decide what remains. You decide what grows. You decide what defines you. So the next time you feel that shift, that familiar heaviness, that intrusive thought, that quiet whisper trying to settle in, don't ignore it. Don't entertain it. Don't agree with it. Confront it immediately. Because hesitation gives it time, and time gives it strength. But decisive rejection removes its power instantly. That is your authority, and most people never use it. But now, now you see the process, now you recognize the pattern, and recognition without action changes nothing. So this is your moment to take control, to guard your mind, to break every silent agreement that has been working against you. Because the moment you stop agreeing, the influence loses its voice. Now, this is where everything comes together. This is where the cycle either ends or tightens permanently. Because once you become aware, you are no longer neutral. You are either in control or you are choosing not to be. And most people, even after recognizing the pattern, still fall back into it. Not because they are weak, but because they never built intentional resistance. Awareness without action changes nothing. You can see the pattern clearly, you can recognize the thoughts, you can even feel the moment it starts. But if you do nothing, it continues. That is how cycles survive. Not through power, but through passivity. You wait, you delay. You tell yourself, "I'll deal with it later." And in that delay, the pattern reactivates. The thoughts return. The heaviness settles. The same internal script begins to play again. And now you're back where you started. That's why timing is everything. The moment you sense the shift, you must respond immediately, decisively, without hesitation. Because hesitation is the opening. Hesitation gives space. And space allows the cycle to rebuild itself. You don't negotiate with it. You don't observe it passively. You interrupt it. Right there. Right then, you shift your focus. You redirect your thoughts. You change your internal state on command. That is how control is established. Not slowly, but instantly. Because the longer you sit in a negative state, the deeper it embeds. The longer you allow certain thoughts, the stronger they become. So you don't wait, you act. You take ownership of your mental space. You refuse to let it drift without direction. Because an undirected mind will always fall into familiar patterns. That's why discipline matters. Not extreme effort, not exhaustion, but consistent intentional correction. Every time the pattern tries to return, you cut it off again and again and again until it weakens, until it stops, until it no longer feels natural. That is how you reprogram your internal world. Through repetition, but this time in your favor. You replace unconscious habits with conscious control. You replace passive thinking with intentional focus. You replace agreement with authority. And slowly, everything shifts. The same space that once triggered you no longer has power. The same moment that once drained you becomes neutral because the trigger is gone. The pattern is broken. The cycle is finished. But there's another level most people miss. It's not just about stopping negative patterns. It's about establishing stronger ones. Because if you remove something and replace it with nothing, the old pattern will return. So you build new responses, new habits, new internal reactions. You train your mind to default to clarity, to strength, to control, so that even in moments of isolation you remain grounded, present, unshaken. That's how you secure your mind long term. Not by avoiding certain places, but by becoming stable in every place. Because true control is not situational, it is internal. And once it's internal, nothing external can dominate it. That is the level most people never reach, because they focus on the environment instead of mastering themselves within it. But you are not most people. You are now aware. You have seen the pattern from beginning to end. You understand how it starts, how it builds, how it takes hold, and most importantly, how it ends. So now the responsibility is yours to apply it, to live it, to enforce it, because knowledge without action is wasted, and action without consistency is temporary. But consistent action creates permanent change. And that is where your power is. Not in knowing, but in doing. Every single time, without exception. Until it becomes your new normal. Until control becomes automatic. Until your mind no longer drifts, but operates with intention. That is freedom. Not the absence of challenges, but the inability for those challenges to control you. And once you reach that point, nothing hidden, nothing subtle, nothing repetitive can ever trap you again. You were never meant to live unaware. You were meant to stand in control. Every hidden pattern that once weakened you is now exposed. Every silent agreement that once held you is now broken. You are no longer passive, you are present, alert, and unshaken. Your mind is no longer a battlefield, it is a place of authority. From this moment forward, nothing enters without your permission. This ends now, and you walk in complete control.